Part 1. A Shadow in the Snow. The boy stood alone in the falling snow, his fingers blue from the cold, clutching a scrap of charcoal like it was the only thing keeping him alive. Behind him, the flickering light from a sickroom window cast a crooked shadow across the white. His sister Sophie, her breathing already shallow, her skin pale and damp with fever. He was only 5 when death first whispered his name. And it never stopped. In the village of Loten, Norway, the winter of 1868 was bitter. Bitter like the taste of sickness in the house. Bitter like the silence that settled when their mother stopped singing to them at night. Edvard Munch was the middle child of 5, but he felt like a ghost, half here, half not. Their mother died when he was barely old enough to remember her voice, but he remembered the way her hand trembled as it brushed his cheek. Tuberculosis, they said. But Edvard believed it was something darker. Something ancient and hungry that lingered in the corners of their home. When Sophie died too, just a few years later, Edvard began to draw feverishly, portraits of her empty chair, her hairbrush untouched, her smile trapped forever in the sketchbook he carried like a talisman. He was convinced that if he stopped drawing, he too would vanish. His father, a stern military doctor with trembling faith, told him it was blasphemy to draw the dead. God sees what you put on the paper, he warned. But Edvard didn't fear God. He feared the silence that came after death. And so he drew it, again and again. Part 2. The Fever Years. Oslo, then still called Christiania, was a city soaked in fog and moral hypocrisy. When Munch entered the Royal School of Art and Design at age 17, he was already a pale, nervous figure, with sunken eyes and a gait that suggested he walked in 2 worlds. The other students laughed at his trembling lines and distorted figures. His early work, raw, trembling with pain, was dismissed as childish, even grotesque. But there was a professor who noticed something in his gaze. "Your paintings make people uncomfortable," the man said quietly, one gray afternoon as they stood before a portrait Munch had done of his dying cousin. "That means they're alive." Munch didn't want to paint what people saw. He wanted to paint what they felt but couldn't say. And that feeling, terror, desire, sickness, loneliness, followed him like a ghost. By the age of 21, he began hallucinating. He heard voices. He spoke to his sister in his dreams. He drank too much, smoked constantly, and painted with a desperation that bordered on violence. "I do not paint what I see," he wrote in his journal. "I paint what I saw, when I closed my eyes." Part 3. The Birth of a Scream. It came to him one evening in 1893 as he walked with 2 friends along a bridge in Oslo. The sky turned the color of blood. The air trembled. "I felt a scream pass through nature," he wrote. And so he painted it. The figure was androgynous, bald, mouth agape, hands pressed to its skull. It was not a person, it was the soul exposed. Behind it, the sky swirled in a violent orange-red vortex. The bridge ran away into the distance. 2 figures walked ahead, unaware. The scream was not heard. It was felt. The scream shocked Norway. Critics called it degenerate, obscene, lunatic. The church accused him of making a mockery of the soul. But in Berlin, in Paris, cities steeped in cynicism and craving emotional truth, it hit like lightning. The painting whispered to people's deepest fears. Death, insanity, loneliness, the inevitability of suffering. He had found his voice, and it was a scream. Part 4. The Woman in Black. Then came Tula Larsen. She was rich, strange, unpredictable, a widow who walked in black even when not in mourning. She saw his work in Berlin and sought him out, inviting him to her salon with the kind of curiosity one might have toward a wounded animal. They became lovers, then enemies, then lovers again. She accused him of obsession. He accused her of possession. She wanted marriage. He wanted madness. Their love spiraled into paranoia. One night, during a drunken fight, a pistol went off. Munch's left hand was torn by the bullet. The wound never truly healed. He called it his wedding ring from the devil. He painted her over and over, sometimes as a seductress, other times as a vampire drinking from his throat. Their relationship was a battlefield where no one won. Part 5. Through the Glass of Insanity. In 1908, the walls of Munch's mind cracked. He was found wandering the streets of Copenhagen, trembling, muttering about spirits and colors bleeding into each other. He hadn't slept in days. He feared that Sophie was calling to him from the snow. He checked himself into a private asylum. There, in the sterile whiteness of the clinic, he painted, slowly, methodically, as though repairing the pieces of his shattered self. The doctors encouraged him to paint landscapes. So he painted fields, silent, endless, godless. But even those had shadows. The color of screams. The years passed, and Munch drifted farther into the shadows of his mind. His fame had grown, yes, but like a noose around his neck. Critics who once scoffed at his canvases now praised them, but their voices sounded hollow, distant. He was no longer painting for recognition. He was painting to survive. In his house in Eekly outside of Oslo he began a new phase. The World War had scarred the land, and though it hadn't reached his doorstep, it had invaded his soul. He saw death again, not as a memory but a looming presence, faceless, faceted, infinite. His studio became a battleground. The canvases lined the walls like ghosts awaiting resurrection. He walked among them like a general surveying fallen soldiers. Some he left unfinished, others he repainted over and over, trying to trap a flicker of something just beyond reach. He painted the sun, a blinding explosion of yellow and orange. Was it a symbol of hope or madness? No one knew. Not even Munch. He only knew he had to get it out like poison from a wound. He began talking to his paintings, whispering to them late at night. "Are you the one who understands?" he would murmur to a self-portrait. Or, "Why didn't you save her?" he would hiss at a pale canvas with the shadow of a woman. Neighbors reported seeing him walking the woods at dawn, shirtless in the cold, talking to the trees. They whispered that the great artist had lost his mind. But Munch knew the truth. The world had never had its mind to begin with. He painted self-portrait, between the clock and the bed in his late years. In it he stands stiff, almost like a corpse already embalmed. To his right, a clock ticking toward death. To his left, a bed empty, perhaps awaiting him. Behind him, his artworks, silent witnesses to his disintegration. He was saying goodbye. But not like most men do. He said goodbye with eyes wide open, staring directly into time. The final dream. Munch fell ill in the winter of 1943. Snow blanketed Eekly, and the trees bowed under the weight of it, like mourners in white veils. He refused doctors. He refused priests. He even refused friends. His only companions were the paintings. One night, in a fevered dream, he saw his sister Sophie, no longer dying but glowing. She reached for him through the scream, past the swirling skies, and whispered in a voice softer than snow. "Edvard, you captured death. Now let it go." When he awoke he cried. Not because of pain, but because for the first time in decades he had felt warmth. He died on January 23, 1944. Alone but surrounded by the very essence of himself, his art. Legacy in blood and color. After his death, the Nazis attempted to seize his works, labeling them as degenerate. But the people of Norway rose. They hid his paintings. They defied orders. They preserved the madness and the brilliance of a man who had lived not for applause, but for truth. Today, Munch's paintings hang in the National Gallery, in the Munch Museum, in the halls of the world. But they are not decorations. They are wounds. Open, pulsing, eternal. Every time someone stands before the scream, they are not simply viewing a masterpiece. They are hearing what Munch heard that night by the fjord. They are standing at the edge of the infinite, and listening to the silence that follows the scream. The final scream. Munch's body had aged like a crumbling cathedral, its foundations weakened by years of neglect and isolation. His eyes dimmed but burned inward with a final intensity. As the Nazi regime labeled his art degenerate, removing his paintings from German museums, Munch laughed bitterly. What was ever more degenerate than life itself? He spent his last years in Eekly alone, surrounded by ghosts, literal and imagined. Ghosts of lovers he drove away. Ghosts of friends long dead. Ghosts of himself. He painted them all. One of his final works was self-portrait, Between the Clock and the Bed. A haunting vision of a man standing rigid, hollow-eyed between time and death. The bed, where he had lain feverish as a child. The clock, where his mother's final breaths counted down. He stood in between as he always had, unable to stop time or flee mortality. Munch did not die with a scream. He died in silence. On a cold January night in 1944, in Nazi-occupied Norway, Edvard Munch drew his last breath at the age of 80. No one heard. No one wept. But the world would, eventually. Years later, when the scream was stolen from the National Gallery in Oslo, the world mourned as if a sacred relic had been desecrated. The scream was not just paint on canvas, it had become a universal cry of the human condition. The anguish of a man who stared too deeply into life's abyss, and painted what he saw. Munch's home in Eekly became a museum. His ashes were buried on the estate, beneath the frozen Nordic soil. But his true legacy was less tangible. The deep unease he left within those who saw his work. The tremble in the gut. the whisper in the mind. The scream no one else could hear, but everyone felt. He once wrote, "From my rotting body, flowers shall grow and I am in them and that is eternity." And perhaps that is true. For in every echo of silence, in every lonely heartbeat, in every midnight anxiety that claws at the soul, Munch is there. Still painting, still screaming,